The day my son came home crying, I made a decision that would change everything. He walked through the door, 8 years old, backpack dragging on the floor, tears cutting tracks down his dusty cheeks. I knelt down and asked him what happened. He looked at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Dad, Marcus's mom said we don't belong there. She said we're poor and embarrassing." I held him tight, and I made a silent promise. They had no idea who they were talking to. My name is Daniel Holt, and for the past 3 years, I've been living a lie. Not to hurt anyone, but to find out who was real. You see, when you have money, real money, you learn fast that most people around you aren't really your friends. They love your wallet. They love your connections. They love what you can do for them. So after my divorce, after I moved to a quiet suburb in Ohio, I made a choice. I drove an old pickup truck. I wore plain clothes. I told nobody what I did for a living. I just wanted my son, Caleb, to have a normal childhood. To have real friends. To be loved for who he was, not what his father owned. But some people just can't help themselves. Before we go further, if you're new here, welcome to Stories of Mr. Dreamer. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like. These stories are built for people who believe that dignity always gets the last word. Now, let's get back to Daniel and Caleb. The neighborhood we moved into was nice. Not flashy, but comfortable. Clean sidewalks, big oak trees, kids riding bikes on Saturday mornings. I thought it was perfect. Caleb made a friend almost immediately. A boy named Marcus who lived 4 houses down. They were inseparable for the first year. Legos, video games, baseball in the backyard. I was relieved. Caleb was happy. That's all I needed. Marcus's mother was a woman named Patricia Langley. She was the kind of woman who made sure everyone knew what she had. New car every year. Designer sunglasses to check the mail. Loud opinions about property values and school rankings. Her husband, Greg, worked in finance, middle management, I later found out. But Patricia talked about him like he ran Wall Street. For a long time, she ignored me. I was just a quiet divorced dad who drove the old truck. She'd wave sometimes, barely. She never invited Caleb to birthday parties. She never let Marcus come to our house for sleepovers. I noticed, but I stayed quiet. Caleb didn't seem to mind at first. Then came the spring fundraiser at Maplewood Elementary. Every year, the school hosted a big event, an outdoor gala, basically. Parents set up tables. There was live music, a silent auction, food. It was meant to be a community night. Caleb had been excited about it for weeks. He'd helped make decorations in class. He wanted to show me his artwork on the display wall. We showed up in my truck. I was wearing jeans and a clean button-down shirt. Caleb had on his best outfit, khakis, and a blue polo. He looked sharp. I told him so, and he grinned from ear to ear. The moment we walked onto the school lawn, I saw Patricia Langley holding court near the entrance. She had a little circle of women around her, wine glasses in hand, laughing at something. When she saw us approach, her smile didn't disappear. Eat chains. It became the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. "Oh," she said, loudly enough for her whole group to hear. "I didn't think you'd be able to make it to something like this, Daniel. The ticket prices this year are a bit steep for some families." Her friends giggled. Not all of them. One woman looked away, uncomfortable, but enough of them laughed to make Caleb look up at me with confused eyes. I smiled and said, "We're glad to be here." Paid for our tickets and walked inside. But Patricia wasn't done. Later that evening, during the silent auction, Caleb got excited about a basketball signed by a well-known Ohio player. He ran over to the table and stared at it. He asked me if we could bid on it. I said sure, we could try. I wrote down a modest number, not wanting to draw attention. Patricia appeared beside us. She looked at the bid sheet, looked at my number, and laughed out loud. "Oh, Daniel, honey, that's adorable." Then she took the pen and wrote a number 4 times higher. She looked at Caleb and said, with that sharp, sweet voice of hers, "Some things just aren't meant for everyone, sweetheart." Caleb's face fell. He stepped back. He didn't say a word. I put my hand on his shoulder and guided him away to look at his artwork on the display wall. I told him it was the best piece up there. And honestly, it was. A painted skyline with a tiny figure standing on a rooftop looking at the stars. His teacher had put a gold star sticker on the corner. "We left early and on the drive home," Caleb cried. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and made some calls. The first call was to my attorney. The second was to my business partner. The third was to the principal of Maplewood Elementary. You see, what Patricia Langley did not know, what none of them knew, was that 3 years earlier, I had sold a logistics software company I'd built from scratch for $64 million. I had quietly invested a portion of that into real estate, including, as it happened, 2 commercial properties in the same county. I had a team of people who ran things while I lived simply by choice. The old truck was paid for in cash. The modest house was bought outright. I had no mortgage because I had no need for one. I wasn't hiding because I was ashamed. I was hiding because I was watching. Now, it was time to stop watching. The next week, I attended the school's parent advisory board meeting. I'd never been before. I walked in quietly and sat in the back. Patricia was near the front, as usual, holding her committee chair title like a crown. The principal, a kind man named Mr. Ellison, was running through budget shortfalls. The school needed new science lab equipment. They needed updated reading materials for the lower grades. The total gap in funding was around $42,000. People were frowning. Patricia was suggesting bake sales and car washes with a straight face. I raised my hand. Mr. Ellison looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Holt," he said, "I didn't know you'd be joining us tonight." "First time," I said. "I'd like to cover the funding gap. All of it. I'll have a check to your office by Friday." The room went very quiet. Patricia turned around slowly. The expression on her face was something I will never forget as long as I live. It was the look of someone whose entire map of the world has just been redrawn. Mr. Ellison cleared his throat. That's extraordinarily generous, Mr. Holt. Are you certain?" "Completely," I said, "and I'd like to set up a small annual scholarship in the name of students who demonstrate creativity. We can name it whatever the school decides. I'll have my attorney draw up the paperwork." After the meeting, 3 different parents came up to introduce themselves. One woman, Sandra, who I later learned was Marcus's aunt, shook her head slowly and said, "I owe you an apology on behalf of some people in this neighborhood." I told her there was no need, but I wasn't finished. 2 days later, I found out through a mutual contact that Greg Langley's firm was actually in the process of seeking investors for a regional expansion. They were struggling. Greg had been quietly asking around for 6 months. Nobody had committed. The amount they needed was significant, just over $2 million. Now here's what I want you to understand. I'm not a cruel man. I don't believe in destroying people, but I do believe in consequences. Real, unavoidable. Mirror dash, hell dash, up dash, to dash, your dash. Face consequences. I arranged a meeting. Greg Langley walked into the conference room of my attorney's office building looking confident. He didn't know who had called the meeting. He thought he was meeting with a regional investment group. When he saw me sitting at the head of the table in a suit, next to my attorney and my financial advisor, his mouth actually opened and then closed again without making a sound. I let Desiley sit there for a moment. Then I said, "Hello, Greg. I believe we're neighbors." He sat down slowly. He looked at my attorney. He looked back at me. "Daniel," he said, very carefully. "I had no idea." "I know," I said. "That was rather the point." I told him I'd heard about his firm's expansion needs. I told him I had reviewed the prospectus, and then I told him something he did not expect. I told him I was prepared to invest under one condition. The condition was simple. Not money, not business terms. I told him that the next time his wife encountered my son, or any child in that school, and made them feel small because of what their parent drove or wore or earned, that would be the end of our business, relationship, permanently. And I told him that I'd already spoken with 2 other investors in the area who felt similarly about the way business and community should work together. Greg Langley sat very still then and nodded. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "She went too far." "I know she did. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm genuinely sorry." And the strange thing was, I believed him. I'm not telling you I invested in his firm to be kind to Greg. I'm telling you I did it because Caleb had to go to school with Marcus every day. Because two boys who had been real friends deserved a chance to stay that way. Because I didn't want my son to grow up watching his father burn things down. I wanted him to watch his father build things up, even when it was hard, even when part of you wanted the fire. 2 weeks later, Patricia Langley knocked on my front door. She stood on my porch, looking like she'd been rehearsing this in the mirror all morning. She had a bottle of wine in her hand and she looked tired. She said, "I owe your son an apology." I said, "Yes, you do." She asked if she could speak to him. I thought about it. Then I called Caleb down from his room. He stood in the doorway, this 8-year-old kid, looking at her with those calm, steady eyes that I swear he did not get from me. And Patricia Langley, in her designer jacket, crouched down slightly and said, "Caleb, I was unkind to you, and I'm sorry. That was wrong of me. You're a wonderful kid, and your dad loves you very much." Caleb looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "It's okay. Marcus is still my friend." She stood up and her eyes were glassy. She handed me the wine, said thank you quietly, and walked back down the porch steps. I closed the door. I looked at my son. "How'd I do?" he asked. I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that starts in your chest and surprises you. "You did perfect." "But," I said, "you did absolutely perfect." That signed basketball from the fundraiser auction, by the way. But one, not the original. I had my team track down the same player and explain the story. 3 days later, a package arrived at the house. Signed Bo. Personal note to Caleb inside. 2 tickets to a game that fall. I didn't tell Caleb where it came from. I just put it on his desk while he was at school. When he came home and saw it, he stood there staring for almost a full minute. Then he turned around and said, "Dad." "How?" And I said, "Sometimes the universe just knows." He hugged me so hard I nearly fell over. Here's what I want you to take from this. I'm not telling you this story to brag. I'm telling you because there are parents out there right now doing exactly what Patricia did, judging kids for what their families have or don't have, teaching their children that worth is measured in labels and cars and zip codes. And there are kids like Caleb absorbing those messages and wondering if they're right. They're not right. A child's dignity is not negotiable. It doesn't have a price tag, and the people who try to put one on it almost always find out, sooner or later, that they misjudged the room. I kept the old truck. I still drive it. I like it. It runs fine, and it doesn't owe me anything. Caleb is in 6th grade now. He and Marcus are still friends. Last summer, they built a cardboard rocket ship in our garage that took up half the space for 3 weeks. I didn't mind one bit, and somewhere along the way, this story found its way to the people at Stories of Mr. Dreamer. Because stories like this one deserve to be heard. Stories about quiet strength, about choosing dignity over drama, about letting your actions speak so loudly that your words barely need to leave the room. If this story hits something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, or watched someone you love be made to feel small, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Stories of Mr. Dreamer. Because every single week we bring you real, raw, human stories about people who refuse to stay down. Because the truck you drive has never once decided your worth. And the people who think it does, they always find out.